Okay, this video is about Vishal Mangalwadi. He is academic hero number 23, and it's largely a book review. He wrote this extraordinary book called The Book That Made Your World: How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization. And he's an Indian guy. And what's fascinating about this book is this is totally from the perspective of a guy who lived his whole life in India. And there's a lot of surprises in it, and they're quite relevant to current events and recent history. That painting, by the way, was an open Bible by Vincent van Gogh from 1885. All right, so Vishal Mangalwadi, you can memorize his name by man in the beginning, gal like a girl, Wadi, and then at the end. He was born in 1949, and what he basically says is that India was saved from English tyranny by the Bible, and what he felt was that was the main thing. He said initially when England went into India, like they do in so many other places, they just want to loot the place and subjugate the population. But he said the Christian missionaries were different than the corporations like the East India Company. They wanted to Christianize the public, and they did a lot of things that were helpful to the individuals. They translated the different Indian dialects into written form so people could read the Bible, and that greatly improved literacy. He also says that the Buddhism religion and the Hinduism religion claim that mankind is unable to know truth, and this position limited their development of education, technology, and science. He says the Bible claims that it can know truth and that man was created in the image of God, and that these things promote an intellectual approach to life and develop the university system and educational systems. He says that according to him, Hinduism promotes a caste system which is inherently unfair, and it consigns many people to be untouchables for a life of poverty and menial labor. He says even that lower caste women had to take their shirts off when high-ranking upper caste men passed by. He says the Bible says that everyone is equal before God, including a peasant and a king. So you want to talk about something that raises up the poor. Nietzsche, the German philosopher, had said that he hated Christianity because it was a religion of poor people and slaves and losers, in his opinion. Vishal says that he thought the Protestants were bigger promoters of education than the Catholics. He felt that the Catholics, were kind of stupid in a sense. They'd sit around at Mass, the priest would be talking in Latin, and nobody would understand the Latin, and that it was a bit of a big joke, whereas the Protestants, in his opinion, had made big efforts to translate the Bible into the vernacular common languages of the people so that everyone was motivated to learn how to read so they could read the Bible, and this dramatically improved education all over the place. And he sort of thinks Protestants are smarter than Catholics and more literate. And there's some truth in them certainly being more literate. Look at England in the 1800s, had an incredible amount of novels, wonderful novels produced by them. But it's also maybe because the Protestant churches are so ugly, nobody goes into painting or sculpture. And of course, Vishal, from India, he's influenced by Protestant Christianity, coming from England originally. And also to me, my father's Irish, so I'm half Irish. The Anglican Church in some ways is a bit of a joke, okay? Who's the founder of Anglican Christianity? Henry VIII, and he was the worst husband in the world. And why did he want to have a new version of Christianity in the form of Protestantism? It was so that he could just loot the Catholic Church, steal all their land, take all their monasteries. Okay, Vishal says it's impossible to practice psychology without including theology. He said there's no way around that. He says that the modern atheist values of countries like the United States are represented by musicians like Kurt Cobain. He's from the rock group Nirvana, who was a musically talented guy, but he's also a suicidal drug addict. Like so many of these rock and rollers, a lot of times they're drug addicts and they die young. And I like the quote from Ayn Rand. What Ayn Rand had said about a lot of rock and roll types is that If a person has a positive worldview, they're enthusiastic to do something useful with their life. A person who's abusing drugs and alcohol and whatnot, it's a sign of somebody who doesn't have a positive, good vision for their life. I mean, if you are enthusiastic to achieve something or do something good, you don't want to be damaging your brain and by getting stoned. Okay, anyways, Vishal says that Kurt Cobain, an atheist, suicidal drug addict, is a symbol of the modern West, which is in severe decline. So it's interesting to see the point of view of where the West is at from a man from India, a very smart guy. He says Protestantism produced, magnificent musicians like Bach, who devoted themselves to God for the glory of God and celebrated life. And he says it also enabled them to handle difficult problems in life. Bach was an orphan at 9 years of age, but he had family support and religious faith to sustain him and develop his musical talents. Vishal says that Buddhism left no significant musical tradition in India. He feels that Buddhism, which he was raised in Buddhism, he says it sees existence as suffering, it's highly pessimistic, it's not capable of producing any music of hope or joy. He did give credit to the Catholic Church for developing polyphonic music. He says that Hindu music in the past was really overly simplistic, but recently he feels it's getting better and that Bollywood has been a big positive influence, in his opinion, on Hindu music. He says that the USA is in terrible decline. He says that without the Bible, he says the USA has become, in his opinion, backward. He says they can't even tell you what a family is, and their whole metaphysics is just being destroyed into nonsense. He says a postmodern university like in the United States, they can't even tell you what a good man is. And somebody who's so judgmental is basically an idiot. You have to make value judgments all day long. Do I walk towards this? Do I walk away from that? I mean, it's inevitable. It's an inevitable part of life. It's normal. Vishal says that it was the Bible that created what is good in modern India, most of what is good in modern India. This guy is a total philanthropist who devoted his life to helping people. And he was involved in all kinds of charity organizations. He was put in jail several times for trying to help people by corrupt officials. Vishal says that if humans are not created in the image of God, then they are just animals and they can be owned. He says a lack of religion provides a justification for slavery. Yeah, by the way, BCW is Book That Changed World, and I put page numbers in here for a lot of stuff, so if anybody wants it, it's a real easy book to read. There's an audio CD version of it, plus he's got a bunch of videos on YouTube and other locations, so if you want to see what this guy has to say. He said that he tried to read the Hindu scriptures, and he was told they weren't translated into Hindu. He was told he could only read commentaries about the Vedas, but not the Vedas themselves. He was told to find a guru and spend several years practicing Vedic chants and performing sacrifices. He emphasized that Western imperialism and Christian missionaries were very different things. The imperialistic corporations, they wanted to come in and loot the country and basically have the people do menial, almost slave labor, versus the missionaries where they're trying to Christianize them, but simultaneously that meant also educate them and have them treated better. And there were sort of two views. India was such a big place. Many thought it was inevitable that they would have eventually achieved their freedom, and the question being, should they achieve their freedom as hating England, or should they achieve their freedom as being friends with England? Those were two of the major attitudes of the English back in the 1700s and 1800s. The imperialist corporations, they didn't want the missionaries around. They knew the missionaries would probably cause trouble in terms of give the people ideas of wanting freedom and whatnot. Vishal says that the idea of a God who's a creator and man created in his image encourages that man should be a creator, and that the idea that God could also have come to earth as a person also increases the attitude that one can talk to this God, communicate with this God, even though that had been known well before that concept, of course. VM says that Buddhism denies the existence of God, and that with Buddhism, a person cannot pray to God. So Buddhism, in his opinion, it's a godless religion, if you call it a religion. Vishal says that Hindu meditation emphasizes that a person should try to empty their mind, to transcend thinking, to get away from thinking, to escape thinking. So transcendental meditation seeks to escape thinking by focusing on a meaningless sound like Om. Vishal says that Hinduism uses logic to destroy logic, and that it considers rationality to some extent to be an illusion called Maya. Vishal says that Ashoka was India's greatest Buddhist ruler. And I've heard Ashoka criticized in the past by people saying he was a brutal tyrant, and once he's established his conquest, then he tells everybody, oh, become a Buddhist and meditate, because he wants to calm them down so they don't give him any trouble. Be that as it may, I'm no expert on Indian history, and I'm no expert on Buddhism or Ashoka, but these are simply some interesting things here. Okay, Vishal says that the Indian universities in their teaching emphasize the influence of the ancient Greeks, but they're ignorant greatly of the influence of the Bible. He says it was Christianity that got people to stop burning widows in India. He said that Harvard professors, these modern, postmodern university types, protested when Christian missionaries said they shouldn't be burning widows. The Harvard professor said that the tradition of widow burning should be respected. Vishal says that in England, King Henry VIII thought that reading the Bible would pacify the public in the early days of the Reformation, but it had the opposite effect. They began to question his authority. The Protestant Bible was originally translated into English by William Tyndale, and that was the first widely available version of the Protestant Bible was called the Geneva Bible. It came out in about 1560, and it promoted every believer is his own priest, and that's a very interesting concept. We'll come back to that. Every believer is his own priest. The Geneva Bible is the one that was used by Shakespeare. So in a sense, I see myself as being a little bit like a William Tyndale in the sense that I'm translating medicine and nutrition books to the masses. And this same idea that every person could be his own nutrition possible expert. The reality is you eat by yourself most of the time or just with your friend or family. So you have to be your own nutrition expert or you're screwed. And most people, when it comes to health, they're screwed. Most people do not age well. You go to any hospital all day long in the radiology department, you see post-op chest x-ray, open heart surgery. You see post-op x-ray of a foot, amputation all day, amputation of a leg all day long, hip replacement, shoulder replacement, post-op film of the abdomen. It's nonstop. People are getting cut up left and right for all these dietary diseases. And then here's my joke. The Bible, he wanted to translate it to provide the truth to the masses. And my joke is after very close knowledge. I got 99% of my boards. I know the textbooks very well. They're not worth translating. They're a joke because they deny the influence of diet and toxicology on disease, and that's about 75% of disease, maybe more. McDougall thinks there are 80% of disease is due to diet. He doesn't even include toxicology. I would include toxicology because it's actually really important. Most of the nutrition books are also a joke. They're just advertising Mediterranean diet, all this nonsense. There's very few good nutrition book authors. Some of the ones who I think are really good: McDougall, T. Colin Campbell, Esselstyn, Chef AJ, Dennis Burkett, Nathan Pritikin, Walter Kempner, and there's some other real good ones too. But I'm just saying I have a boring life. I sometimes go into bookstores, used bookstores, and counted all the different books on nutrition and how many of them are good and how many of them are nonsense. And literally, it's about 1%, 2% that are worth anything. Almost all of them are untrue and not good for you. Everybody's promoting these high-fat diets and other types of nonsense, paleo, low-carb, all this nonsense. All right, King James Bible came out in 1611, and that was really a protest of the Geneva Bible. Of course, King James, being the king, he didn't like the Geneva Bible saying that every man is his own priest and equal to a king, and the king's authority should be questioned, and the king should be servant of the people. They wanted, King James felt divine right of kings is the way things should be. But the King James Bible is kind of famous for being literary. The King James Bible is really like 85% or more is just William Tyndale's translations. All right, so again, this idea of God the creator who was a worker made the world in 6 days. So man should be a worker, man should be a creator, and he should get the 7th day off to rest. Vishal says that the Bible dramatically influenced technology. This idea of man the creator, inventor, led to incredible technological advancements in Christian countries For example, the horse was not native to these countries, but they developed the horseshoe, the horse collar, tandem harness, many other technologies related to farming, water wheels, windmills. He said the monks wanted to improve technology so they would have more time for prayer, and that the monks developed the clock because they wanted to be able to pray on time. So, look at Gregor Mendel. He's the guy who figured out the genetics with the pea plants. And some of the reason too why I think this is relevant is there's a trend, look at in China and other places to make the Bible illegal and to forbid it and all this. And what the people don't realize is it's sort of been, a dominant force to get people to become educated, to be nice to each other, for different cultures to get along with each other. So here's a quote from George Orwell. George Orwell from 1940 from his book Notes on the Way. He says, "For 200 years, we had sawed and sawed at the branch we were sitting on, and in the end, much more suddenly than anyone had foreseen, our efforts were rewarded, and down we came. But unfortunately, there had been a little mistake. The thing at the bottom was not a bed of roses, after all. It was a cesspool, full of barbed wire. It appears that the amputation of the soul isn't just a simple surgical job, like having your appendix out. The wound has a tendency to go septic." From George Orwell. Okay, Vishal continues. He says that before 1960, when the USA was more religious, suicide amongst teenagers was almost non-existent. He says now there are many hundreds of thousands of teenage suicides every year. Vishal then quotes Margaret Thatcher in England in 1988, and here's what she said. "We are a nation whose ideals are founded on the Bible. Also, it is quite impossible to understand our literature without grasping this fact. The truths of Judeo-Christian tradition are infinitely precious, not only as I believe because they are true, but also because they provide the moral impulse which alone can lead to that peace, in the true meaning of the word, for which we all long." So that was Margaret Thatcher. So Vishal continues, and he says that Hindu scholars, in his opinion, did not develop India's national language of Hindi. He says it was the Bible translators who did it, and it was based on the dialect of the poet Tulsidas from AD 1532 to 1623. And I got the page numbers again for all the stuff if you want to look it up. Vishal says that every living literary language in India, including Bengali and Urdu, is a testimony to the Christian missionary Bible translators. He said that the university system is the creation of the Bible and Christianity, and that the Greeks and Romans did not have universities. Vishal again brings up the point, I had made this point in an earlier lecture, that the atheist John Stuart Mill was against educating people of India. Again, if you want to exploit a place, you want the people to be stupid. If people are illiterate and stupid, then it's much easier to force them to do menial labor and to be slaves, okay? If you care about somebody, you want to help them. You teach them how to read, you show them a couple good books, you get them started on their way, and then they can just progress on their own. So that's a good point. So, the atheist philosopher John Stuart Mill, even though he wrote a lot about wanting freedom for himself, he did not want freedom for England's imperialistic controlled places. Vishal says that Christian missionaries, they pissed off a lot of people because they opposed traditions in India like widow burning, untouchability, polygamy, and acceptance of infanticide. Okay, Vishal says that India is famous for having geniuses of mathematics, but that math did not become widespread until the Bible school system was developed. He says that astronomy was inspired by the idea, again, of a rational creator who had created a universe in a rational way. And Isaac Newton is given as a perfect example of a devout scientist interested in the Bible, astronomy, alchemy, and chemistry. And, there's a tendency for these things to roll one into the other. Vishal says that China, for example, did not develop science because it was atheistic and didn't have any motivation to do so. And he feels that that's the same reason that India didn't have a worldview before the Christian missionaries, in his opinion, despite having lots of very, very smart people, to motivate them to really develop science on a widespread basis. He says that only in Christian countries did astrology turn into astronomy, alchemy into chemistry, or math into language of science. Vishal says that almost all the pioneers of science from 1500 to 1900 were Christians, and at least 60% of them were very devout. And in his opinion, a lot of this comes out, of course, right after 1500 of the Protestant Reformation and them being able to read the Bible in their own native language and that inspiring them to work to the glory of God. And, perfect examples are like Bach. He wrote on every composition to the glory of God. And, a lot of people think Bach's the greatest composer ever. Michelangelo, the greatest artist ever. Newton, the greatest scientist ever. And they all specifically labored for the glory of the God. And that's another reason why, too, I say, hey, if you want to become a great achiever, you have to go with whatever your own beliefs and culture you want to go with. But, having a sense of inspiration dramatically improves a person's potential for achievement. So when people, mock it or laugh at, you say, well, good. What has your belief system achieved? Without faith in God, you've got, and also people do a lot of evil stuff. I mean, right now, it's, people say, oh, well, I would have not allowed tyranny if I lived during the time of Mao or Stalin or Hitler or something. Bullshit. Okay, right now, we've got Ivy League psychiatrists. There's tons of literature showing that the attention deficit stimulants they give these kids and the mania medications they give these kids are toxic to these children in the long term and very harmful to them. And no one says or does anything about it. So you've got, our Ivy League institutions, theoretically, some of our best institutions, best medical centers, and they're just evil, okay? They're making money selling drugs to poison children. I mean, would you poison a child for money? No, it's totally evil. And don't hesitate to say it. If you don't call it out, you could never fix it, okay? That should be called out. It's ridiculous. Harvard was originally founded for Bible study, and it was named after Reverend John Harvard with the motto, truth for the Christ and the church, okay? And Vishal says that the Bible, it's more than a handbook of private piety. It's the foundation of Western civilization. With faith in God, there's no guarantee of a good life and a good society, but there's hope and there's, a better chance of it. Christianity puts an emphasis on forgiveness, and forgiveness enables to break a cycle of tit for tat, back and forth nasty behavior. And it gives people a chance to break that cycle and get along and live peacefully together. It inspires freedom. It's something that helps the poor and the downtrodden to try to improve their lives. And here's a quote by Horace Greeley from the 1800s. He said, "It is impossible to enslave mentally or socially a Bible-reading people." And that's also why, tyrants, they hate the Bible because it encourages people to be free.